Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well still, and welcome to this night-ending bonus upload. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to this night-ending bonus upload, shall we? The next two encounters or experiences that you are going to hear are very traumatic in my eyes, and they both do connect. The last one is especially saddening, and you will see why after hearing it.
Today's first experience. This happened when I was about 7 years old to my uncle. He's no longer with us, and I'd like to share his experience. Growing up, I lived in northern Michigan on 5,000 acres of farm/ranch land that backed up to state land. Nothing but miles of forest and pasture could be seen. Needless to say, it made my family pretty tough, and it takes a lot to spook us. We are all avid hunters, fishermen, and outdoorsmen. Being the only girl, I was raised as a tomboy, and I'm just the same. My uncle went off to join the military, becoming a senior NCO in a prominent Special Force Division of the United States Navy. He was 6'4", built like a wrestler, obviously skilled in survival tactics, and nothing rattled him. He was home on leave and went out hunting as it was deer season. I remember him coming in the house shaking and crying, saying he saw something in the woods. My uncle never cried. He was tough as nails and would tear someone to shreds before he let them make him cry. My grandmother tried to get him to make sense, but he kept saying he saw a Bigfoot mixed with a wolf. My grandmother immediately got my grandfather, and he rounded up the rest of the guys, my dad, a few male cousins, and my uncle, who was still terrified, but went because he didn't want to be labeled as a chicken. They all got their shotguns and ammunition and saddled up the horses to go clear the woods. Apparently, they were aware of the Dogman, but I was blissfully young and ignorant. They told me that I was to stay inside, and for no reason was I to step outside of the house until they returned. I had never heard my dad or my grandfather be so serious, so I hid in my room. Sunset comes around, and they're still not back yet. I'm getting worried at this point because they are never out in the woods after dark. Shortly, I hear the sound of the horses running to the barn and their voices. I'm so relieved. They looked troubled when they came into the house, but didn't say anything, probably to not spook me. At dinner, my dad laid down the law that I was no longer allowed to play outside or go to the barns alone. I had to have my grandfather with me at all times. Of course, I was upset by this, and I felt my independence was being taken away, but I obeyed. The next morning, my dad and grandfather taught me how to shoot. I knew this was serious. I had overheard the adults talking the night before. Apparently, There were tracks where my uncle had his sighting, bigger than any wolf could make, but they were definitely canine. As I said before, my family were avid outdoorsmen and hunters. We can identify tracks easily, but these could not be identified. About 8 feet up in a tree were claw marks. No Michigan bear could have made those. We also found claw marks of about the same height in multiple trees throughout our property. Had cattle mutilated, and not in a way a coyote or a bear would do it. And that lasted the whole winter. We lost about 30 to 40 head of cattle that winter, all of them mutilated, all with the same wolf/dog tracks in the snow. I really feel like this experience changed my uncle. Who knows? He had done multiple tours in Middle East for Desert Storm and Operation Iraqi Freedom before he had committed suicide. After that experience, though, he was never the same. He went from never ever drinking to never seeing him without a bottle of Jack in his hands, and his eyes were always haunted. He changed his personality and never went out into the woods again. He quit hunting, and he eventually just quit coming home to visit on leave. He didn't even come home for my dad's funeral 2 years later. It was heartbreaking to see him deteriorate the way he did. I truly believe he saw something out there, and ultimately, it killed him. That is one powerful experience. It is very sad. Moving on to the next experience is a missing persons unexplained death or covered up death, I believe. Nothing about this case makes any sense. I covered it when it happened about 6 or 7 months ago, and it's still a missing persons case all this time later. And that person that's missing was a former Navy SEAL and former park ranger. September 29th, 2021. Yellowstone National Park, Wyoming. Yellowstone National Park officials say an autopsy has determined that a man whose body was found on the shore of a lake died of hypothermia. The body of 67-year-old Mark O'Neill of Chimacum, Washington, was found September 20th on the eastern shore of Shoshan Lake. O'Neill's brother, 74-year-old Kim Crumbo of Ogden, Utah, remains missing. The men were on a 4-night backcountry trip and reported overdue. Park officials said Wednesday they will continue to look for Crumbo as the conditions allow. A vacant campsite was found on the lake's south side. Shoshan Lake averages 48 degrees, a temperature that can be deadly within a half an hour. The fouling was sent out by the National Park Service. An autopsy has been completed on 67-year-old Mark O'Neill, whose body was found on the east shore of Shoshan Lake in Yellowstone National Park Monday, September 20th. The autopsy determined the cause of death of O'Neill was exposure. O'Neill from Chimacum, Washington, along with his brother, 74-year-old Kim Crumbo from Ogden, Utah, was reported overdue by a family member Sunday, September 19th, from their 4-night backcountry trip to Shoshan Lake. Search and recovery efforts continue at the lake to locate Crumbo. Crews from the National Park Service Submerged Resource Center are using sonar equipment to detect clues in the water. Park crews continue to search for Crumbo by foot and boat, with the assistance from Grand Teton National Park's helicopter team and dog teams from Western Montana Search Dogs. These recovery efforts will continue for the next several days as conditions warrant. This incident remains under investigation. While we cannot comment any further about the specifics of the investigation, we will provide updates when appropriate to do so. If you have any information that could help investigators piece together a timeline of events, or if you were at the Shoshin Lake area between September 12th through the 19th, please contact us if you have not already. 307-344-2428. A sincere thank you to the public who have expressed interest in assisting with the search. We ask the public to maintain distance from any law enforcement personnel and search crews, equipment, vehicles, and their related activity for the safety of the public in this remote area and to protect the integrity of our work. October 11th, 2021, Tribune News Services, a 74-year-old former Navy SEAL, has been missing in Yellowstone National Park for 3 weeks, Ranger State. Kim Crumbo left in September for a 4-night camping trip in Yellowstone's backcountry with his brother and has not been seen since. The search has continued for nearly 3 weeks using helicopters, boats, sonar technology, and ground crews. Park rangers said in an October 8th news release, current weather forecasts call for deteriorating conditions over the upcoming week, including snow and freezing temperatures. Park officials will continue to search for Crumbo as long as the weather allows, but have begun scaling back the recovery effort. Crumbo was reported missing September 19th after he and his brother did not return from a camping trip, park officials state. His brother, 67-year-old Mark O'Neill, was found dead a day later near Shoshin Lake, the park's second largest lake. He died of hypothermia, park officials state. Shoshin Lake has an average temperature of about 48 degrees year-round, according to National Park Service. People could only survive in that water for about 30 minutes. Crumbo was visiting the park from Ogden, Utah. Both O'Neill and Crumbo worked for the National Park Service, and Crumbo is a former Navy SEAL, park officials say. Authorities said they are conducting an investigation. November 15th, 2021. Guys, we get to hear these news articles, but we really don't get to hear who these people were. Kim Crumbo, yes, was 74 years old, but 74 is not that old if you take care of yourself. And he was a former Navy SEAL, park ranger, avid hiker. And if you go and look at pictures of him, he was definitely in good shape for his age. When you are a former special forces, when you are a former special force officer or NCO or what have you, you don't forget that training so easy, do you? He didn't. And he was a badass. And this next piece of information will kind of introduce you to who he was and why it does not make sense for him to be missing. When Becky Crumbo first saw Shoshin Lake, she couldn't fathom how a storm strong enough to endanger the lives of two experienced outdoorsmen could have blown in so suddenly. The cold water was like glass, she said, but in a boat on that remote lake in Yellowstone's National Park, with members of her family and the National Park Service, she understood. In what felt like only minutes, the tranquil water was starting to get scary, she said. In that moment, she knew what must have happened to her missing husband, Kim Crumbo, and his brother, Mark Crumbo O'Neill, who was found dead on the shore. It was a perfect storm, she said. When Crumbo went missing, the 74-year-old Ogden man's friend and colleagues took to social media to express their disbelief that such a legend, as many described him, could have disappeared in the wilderness. As a Vietnam War veteran, former Navy SEAL, experienced river runner, retired park ranger, he knew how to handle himself in wild places like his friend, Edward Abbey, the author and environmentalist. Crumbo knew the land, they said. Dad was a SEAL and everything that came with that, cranking out horizontal push-ups off a yield sign after a six-pack of beer, and the like, Daniel Crumbo, one of Kim Crumbo's two sons, said. If I was in a pinch in a wild place and I had one person to call upon. It would be Kim Crumbo, said John Davis, head of the conservation organization that Crumbo had been working for when he went missing. Since her husband's disappearance, Becky Crumbo has gotten several messages and phone calls from people who knew him well, convinced that something sinister happened to him. She said, but his wife of 48 years doesn't believe that. It was a fluke thing, and it was an act of nature, she said. And yeah, they both survived a whole lot of things in their life, she continued, but they didn't survive this one. Crumbo, the legend. All of his friends said he was a legend. All right, guys. His wife, I really feel so sad for her. My parents have been married for 51 years. They'll be married 51 years. 48 years is no short time. But he was a SEAL. He survived buds. He survived the Vietnam War. He was not a slouch. He would know what to do if that boat or whatever happened. They don't even know if he was on a boat. All they know is they found his brother on the east shore of the lake. They may have been... Yellowstone is a mysterious, deadly park. We honestly have no idea what exists there. There's been rumors of portals, Dogman, Bigfoot, crawlers, even scarier and worse monster things. Whatever, look at Skinwalker Ranch, guys, where that hunter was propped up and a portal opened in front of him and he said he saw this horrendous monster come out and just scurry off into the woods. If there's portals in Yellowstone, imagine what is in Yellowstone, my friends. Imagine. And I do not believe a former Navy SEAL, former park ranger, and still working for a conservation organization, died so easily. Crumbo, the legend, after becoming a public figure in the conservation world and appearing in some of Abby's writings, Kim Crumbo would eventually achieve minor celebrity status, his son states. Both Kim Crumbo and Mark Crumbo O'Neill were extraordinary and equally remarkable men, Daniel Crumbo said. An updated newspaper clipping from the San Diego Union, now the San Diego Union Tribune, features a photo of Kim Crumbo, taken just after he and the rest of his SEAL Team 1 were awarded the Presidential Unit Citation from President Richard Nixon for extraordinary heroism in Vietnam. In addition to the Presidential Award, Crumbo also received a Bronze Star that day for personal acts of heroism. He was photographed standing with his mother, Patricia Elliott. Daniel Crumbo described his uncle O'Neill as a second dad, who was the tall, lean, incredibly good-looking, charming younger brother that always had to outdo whoever did anything before him. Kim Crumbo and O'Neill had both worked as professional river guides. Crumbo was the first full-time employee of Dee Holiday, founder of Holiday River Expeditions, and he also worked for Ken Slate, the famous river runner, wilderness guide, and activist. The two brothers were such familiar sights on the Colorado River that they were immortalized in a poem by Vaughn Short called Seldom Seen and His Macho Crew. Seldom Seen Smith is a character inspired by Slate in the Abby's 1975 classic novel, The Monkey Wrench Gang, about using sabotage to protest the destruction of the environment. According to William Putnam, who put Short's words into music, the poem tells the story of a Grand Canyon raft trip in the 70s when the Bureau of Reclamation was using most of the Colorado's water to fill in behind a newly built Glen Canyon Dam. They say the river cannot run the water down. It can't be done. But if anyone can shoot it through, it's old Seldom Seen and his macho crew. There were Kim and Mark, the Crumbo 2, a couple of Bobs, and a guy named Stu, making up the macho team that rowed their boats for the seldom seen. Wow, that's cool. Let's do that again. They say the river can't be run. The water's down. It can't be done. But if anyone can shoot it through, it's old Seldom Seen and his macho crew. There were Kim and Mark, the Crumbo 2, a couple of Bobs and a guy named Stu, making up that macho team that rowed the boats for Seldom Seen. Damn, that's cool. Crumbo's disappearance. Relatives first reported the brothers overdue from a backcountry trip on September 19th. When they didn't return from their expected 4-night excursion, that day searchers found a vacant campsite on the south side of the lake, which can be reached only by foot. The next day, O'Neill, 67, of Chimacum, Washington, was found dead on the east shore of the lake, along with a canoe, paddle, personal flotation device, and other items. An autopsy later revealed that O'Neill had died of exposure, specifically hypothermia, park officials announced. Crews kept looking for Crumbo, who's still missing, with assistance from search dogs. They swept each trail in the area and searched the shoreline of Shoshin Lake by boat, gridding the water by helicopter, park officials say. But the days-long search transitioned from a rescue to a recovery effort later that week. The Park Service Submerged Resource Center then began using sonar equipment to search for clues in the lake's depths, to no avail. On October 8th, Yellowstone officials announced the recovery effort was being scaled back because of snow and freezing temperatures. It marked the last formal update of that park. All of us at the Yellowstone extend our deepest sympathies to the family, friends, and colleagues of both Mark and Kim, Superintendent Cam Scholey said in the news release that day. I want to personally thank the teams from Yellowstone, other parks and agencies, and partner organizations who work to help us locate Mark and continue to search to bring Kim home. Authorities continue to investigate what happened to the two brothers. Unofficial searches also are ongoing. Crumbo's wife said as volunteers continue to walk the perimeter of Shoshin Lake. The timing of the accident is unspeakably sad, but I take some comfort in knowing that they left us doing what they loved, Daniel Crumbo said, and that they had each other in what would be their last of many shared struggles. Both are dearly loved and missed, and deservedly so. I can't imagine how he didn't make it out of this one, said Ken Sanders, proprietor of Ken Sanders Rare Books in Salt Lake City. He said he got to know Kim Crumbo when they both appeared in the film Wrenched, a documentary about Abby's eco-activism legacy. Fare thee well, Crumbo, wherever you are, Sanders said. Crumbo's legacy. Over the course of 2 decades, Crumbo worked as a National Park Service river ranger, resource management specialist, and wilderness coordinator in the Grand Canyon National Park, as well as a park ranger. He retired from the Park Service in '99. O'Neill also worked as a park ranger at Washington's Olympic National Park and the Grand Canyon before retiring from the Park Service. Kelly Burke, a geologist and the executive director of Wild Arizona, met Crumbo about 3 decades ago on the Colorado River, describing him as one of my dearest, most important friends and mentor and collaborator and warrior hero. Burke said he protected her from the very beginning. While facing rough rapids and harsh elements, Crumbo and Burke worked together on numerous projects along the river, repairing trails, collaborating with members of the Zuni tribe to control erosion of cultural and archaeological sites, and removing non-native and invasive plant species. One such effort involved removing tamarisk shrubs from a location in Glen Canyon called Hidden Sloth, and replacing them with native cottonwood and willow trees. Today, those trees tower above the water. Crumbo was well-read and intelligent, she said, and could speak at length about history, philosophy, and the river. He wrote a river runner's guide to the history of the Grand Canyon, in which he went into meticulous detail of nearly every mile of the 277-mile run from its start at Lee's Ferry to its end, the Grand Walsh Cliffs. Crumbo overlapped with many different groups and organizations over the years in his work to conserve and protect wild places, wildlife habitat connections, and large predators, especially wolves. At the time of his trip to Yellowstone, he was working long hours as a board member and the Wildlands coordinator for conservation nonprofit, the Rewilding Institute. He also was serving as a board member for the Western Wildlife Conservancy and Wild Arizona, the merging of Arizona Wilderness Coalition with the Grand Canyon Wildlands Council, which he founded. And he was contributing to the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, a land conservation group, as well as the wildlife conservation groups Lobos of the Southwest and Project Coyote. Crumbo was highly skilled, highly dedicated, said John Davis, the Rewilding Institute's executive director, who had trekked through miles of wilderness with his friend and colleague. Crumbo was just doing the right thing for wild nature. Burke agreed, saying Crumbo had been on fire lately. Part of those efforts involved working with the Rewilding Institute to revise several of his papers in draft form. On October 26th, the Rewilding Institute posed a draft proposal that Crumbo had written in April to garner support for the Grand Staircase Wildlife Corridor. Kim's tragic disappearance left us all wondering how to carry on his heroic work for wild places and creatures. Read an editor's note accompanying the post. We quickly decided one of many ways we needed to help solidify Kim's great legacy is by publishing his wild visions, even if they were in rough form. The world should know what Kim aimed to achieve. The proposal describes Crumbo's vision to be for a protected wild area that would go from Grand Canyon National Park in Arizona through Bryce Canyon National Park in southern Utah, linking habitat for migrating mule deer and mountain lions. With Kim's words echoing in our minds and hearts, the editor's note continues, we call upon our fellow wilderness and wildlife advocates to push for protection of this whole area. A potential major contribution to 30 by 30, the conservation plan endorsed by President Joe Biden that aims to conserve at least 30% of the U.S. lands and waters by 2030. Well, at least Crumbo's legacy will get this done. We all know that, well, never mind. Crumbo the man, Kim Crumbo and Mark Crumbo O'Neill, were both larger-than-life characters, Daniel Crumbo said. But what people know less of, he continued, is how giving, loving, caring, and thoughtful these two men were. Kim Crumbo completed 2 combat deployments in Vietnam, but he really hated war, his wife noted. Her husband wouldn't like her analyzing, she said. But she thought the desert landscape of the Grand Canyon gave him good contrast to Vietnam. He was gracious, refined, Burke said, but he also had a mischievous side and a wry sense of humor. He was a fan of director Mel Brooks movies, especially Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein. Terry Cleveland, who took 2 river trips with Crumbo in the 80s, said Crumbo was charismatic, but also humble. She recalls him hiking 10 miles out of the Grand Canyon like it was nothing just to meet up with somebody. It's hard to believe that nature caught up with him finally because he seemed indestructible. That legend continues. In his many heavy-duty adventures, Crumbo did have a lot of close scrapes that he never should have survived. He had been in a helicopter crash in Vietnam, and the aircraft had burst into flames. He had been attacked by elk. He had faced innumerable monstrous river rapids. 4 years ago, He also had both of his shoulders replaced, one after another, and it had taken its toll on him. Ironically, when Crumbo and his brother chose to go to Yellowstone, they had been wanting to get to a low-key getaway. A few days in a beautiful place would recharge them mentally and spiritually. Perhaps they found it after seeing their reflections in the Shoshan Lake's still waters. She thinks Crumbo and O'Neill may have been deceived by the tranquility and mistakenly thought they didn't need to wear life jackets. She believes a microburst hit the lake that September day, creating treacherous weather conditions that would have tested the limits of any legend, let alone two men with aging bodies. When asked if she held any hope that Crumbo may still be alive, no, flatly. Her family is planning to hold a memorial service for Crumbo in Tucson, Arizona later this month. Even if Crumbo's body is found someday, it may never be known what exactly happened to him and his brother. But according to his longtime friend and fellow Sierra Club volunteer, Jim Catlin, Crumbo died the way that made most sense for him. He went into the wild itself. They say the river can't be run. The water's down, it can't be done. But if anyone can shoot it through, it's old Seldom Seen and his macho crew. There were Kim and Mark, the Crumbo too. A couple of Bobs and a guy named Stu, making up that macho team that rowed the boats for Seldom Seen.
I truly love that poem, The Crumbo 2. And a guy named Stu. Just, it really does show how loved Kim was. And, it's crazy because being former Navy SEAL, you'd think, whoa, this guy's a badass. Where'd he go? Tom Mezek, older gentleman, airborne ranger, taught survival skills. Where'd he go? People just disappear in these state parks, these federal parks, with no clue left behind. It's very sad, very sad. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this upload as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is, after all, your support that keeps the channel growing and going. And honestly, what gives people a chance and a place to share their experiences and theories judgment-free. Just simply treated with the respect that we all deserve. Thank you. Everyone stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. They are out there and dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Till next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless.